Welcome, everybody. I mean, this is a big deal. This is the 10th anniversary of the Nantucket Book Festival, and our guest, Azar Nafisi, has been a critical part of our festival throughout the years. And the first time I saw you was in 2015.
Yes.
And then we spoke again when we kept the festival alive online during the heart of the pandemic for At Home with Authors. And I'm going to come back to that conversation because Azar was in the middle of writing her new book when we last spoke. And she had some titles in mind for that, which she did not end up using. And I'm going to find out why not.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
I'm leaving.
But let me start. First of all, my name is Michael Schulder, and I'm a member of the board of the Nantucket Book Foundation and Festival. I'm also a journalist. I spent 17 years at CNN, and before that was Peter Jennings' writer. And I always feel like the definition of breaking news is a little distorted. I always went for breaking insights, and I get breaking insights every time I read or hear from Azar Nafisi. So welcome, Azar.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's such a joy to be talking to you. Really.
Same here. Well, let me ask you this. It's a question of where we begin, because this whole thing is going to be an introduction. And, you know, I've read everything of yours, and I thought, well, if we were doing a movie, where would we start? Would the first scene be of you in Tehran as a professor teaching things that the new theocracy didn't want you to teach? Would it be you teaching those young women students secretly in your apartment? Or would it be perhaps your first exposure to stories and imagination transmitted to you through your father? Yeah. Where do you want to start?
I would like to have multiple starts. But I guess they always begin with my father. Last night I was talking about how he would tell me stories every night and how democratic he was in doing that. He also taught me about film. When I was about 5 years old onwards, our weekend begins on Thursday afternoon and goes through Friday. So every Thursday, my father and I would go to the place where movies were, and we'll have a sandwich, and the taste of those sandwiches are still in my palate. And he would take me to films, and that is how I also learned about the world. And American movies, always, the musicals always amazed me. I kept trying to find the secret of the American musicals. You know, one moment you're sitting at the table and eating your steak, you know, and the next moment people jump on the table and start singing and then go back and carve their steak again, you know. I saw those musicals, you know, putting the world on its head. That is how I imagined America before, you know, when I was a little kid. A whimsical place.
Is it possible, and is there any literature, because you are always channeling literature and the
Yes.
insights you get from these authors to live, as you call them, in tumultuous and troubled times. Is there a way to live with whimsy today, and is there a particular author you can call on to maybe help us live with a little more whimsy?
I think, you know, all great writers have a little bit of whimsy in them. There is, in the face of the worst tragedies, you also find a place to smile, or a place, and writing is basically about hope. You write, and if you can change the world just 1 centimeter, that is a great achievement. And writing brings you the hope of connecting to others. The theme of your festival, I think that is the most important thing, the connections. You can't survive without connections. You need them. And today, when empathy is so low, we are in danger of losing a big part of our humanity.
And, you know, I want to, because, you know, to keep that hope alive and to keep that empathy, I mean, the title of your new book is Read Dangerously.
Yes.
The Subversive Power of Literature in Troubled Times. And when I read that title, I thought, you know, based on what I've read about your life and from your books, you have read dangerously, you have taught dangerously in very dangerous circumstances that required a lot of courage. And I just want you to tell us a little bit about the most dangerous times in which you have read and taught and where you got the courage to do it.
Well, you know, if I wanted to tell you about, I lived for 18 years after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and that is when we finally left in 1997. And when you live with danger, you don't realize how dangerous it is. Otherwise, you might not do it, you know. So I would always jump into things and then start getting paranoid.
So situate us actually for the years. I mean, you had gotten your PhD in literature, you were educated, you told us the other night, in England for a while, and then you came back to Tehran just after the revolution, and they were dangerous times, and you were teaching material that was not favored by the new theocratic rulers.
Yeah, you know, the thing about totalitarian system, but this totalitarian regime, was that they came in the name of God. Stalin and Hitler came in the name of man, but they were emissaries of God. And the thing that makes them different from dictatorships is the fact that they want your heart and soul. They're not prepared to just have you obedient as a political citizen, but they want your heart and soul. So they came into every nook and cranny of our private lives. I was mentioning last night that every totalitarian system begins with two things. One is targeting women, minorities, and culture. Those are always the canaries in the mine. You want to know how free a country is, you go to these three. And that is why book burning right now, or cancel culture right now, or banning and criticizing books made me so worried. It was such a warning that things were not going the way they should go. And that is why today more than ever it is important to support our bookstores, our libraries, our festivals, and to create communities of readers. Now, I was going to say something else, right? I mean, no, that is what I was going to say. And the second thing that a totalitarian system does, it thrives and holds control and power through lies. It is the enemy of truth. And that is why writers become by nature. I mean, a writer doesn't have to be in a political party or partisan. All you have to do is write truthfully. And the writers in this place can testify to that. They are, as James Baldwin and Margaret Atwood and David Grossman would say, they are witnesses. And as witnesses, they see it their duty to search the truth, to investigate the truth. And truth is something that you don't know about. You investigate it. So writing doesn't mean that you know everything, that you have made up your mind what you're going to write. You want to investigate. You want to discover. And that you change along with the writing. The writing changes you. And so as someone who was forced as a teacher and a writer to tell the truth, I had to find ways that would make it possible. For culture, they not only banned and censored, many of our great writers and poets were tortured and murdered and killed in jail. They cut Ophelia from the Russian version of Hamlet. Well, Ophelia is a loose woman, apparently. I wrote an essay called Mourning for Ophelia. They cut Desdemona from most of the scenes in Othello, and they cut Othello's suicide, saying that the masses will be depressed watching it. The masses won't be depressed being stoned to death for adultery and prostitution. They say, oh, well, it's our culture, I mean, you know, to be stoned. But they get worried when they watch Sir Laurence Olivier commit suicide on stage, you know. They cut olive oil from most of the episodes of Popeye. Can you guess why? Can anybody guess why? Michael?
Olive oil, I mean, I never liked her in the first place, but no, I can't guess why. I cannot.
Because she's a loose woman. She's never married to Popeye.
Oh. Now I like her.
Yeah, now you like her. And you know, for children's stories, they put veil, the compulsory mandatory veil, on Cinderella and the Little Mermaid and Daddy Longlegs. All these women became, you know, veiled. Now, veil, I'm not talking about it as a religious entity. That's another argument. I'm talking about it when the state tries to gain control of you through religion.
So let me stop you there, because the state, beyond fiction, in real life, the state tried to gain control of you over religion.
Yeah.
And you were teaching at the University of Tehran, and you were teaching works of Western literature, and does my memory serve me correct? You refused to wear the veil that they wanted you to wear.
Yeah, at the beginning, you see, when Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, one of the first things he did was give a fatwa for the veil. Hundreds of thousands of Iranian women poured into the streets, and one of their main slogans was, freedom is neither Western nor Eastern, freedom is global. And they threw acid into the faces of women who weren't wearing the veil. They jailed them, they attacked them with scissors and knives, but they couldn't get them to go back home. And so he had to take back his fatwa. But a few years later, they tried it again. This time, they began with workplaces and public places. If you went into a grocery store, there was a basket with veils in them that you would wear it before you buy things. And in the universities, especially because universities were the hotbed of protest, they would impose the veil. Now, I and two of my, there was a famous meeting where they created a cultural revolution like China. The Committee on Cultural Revolution came to the University of Tehran, and I and two of my colleagues went without the veil. They protested turning universities into torture houses. I protested the veil, and I said that, you know, I would never. You see, one of my colleagues told me, why did you protest? You had to wear it in every grocery store anyway. And I told them universities are not grocery stores to begin with. And the second thing is that I don't want my students to think that for just this bit of money they pay me, I would do as they want me to. So that was a statement that we are not giving in to them. And ever since then, like every time I would go, when I was forced to wear the veil, I would leave a little bit of hair. One of my colleagues who had bought me these things to hold my veil, she kept saying, please don't do it. But it was a statement that you haven't won. And Iranian women, talking about danger, Iranian women refused to wear the mandatory veil. They had commandos, they had these Toyotas in which two armed men and two armed women would protect the city from women like myself. They would stop in women who wore makeup. I used not to wear lipstick, or I would wear very light lipstick when I was in US as a student. As soon as I went to Iran, I would wear lipstick because it was a weapon of mass destruction, you know.
But you know, through this all, I mean, you said, well, we were living in dangerous times. I didn't even pay attention to it. Clearly, you were putting yourself in danger, and ultimately, you had to leave the University of Tehran.
Yeah.
And this, of course, was the launching point for Reading Lolita in Tehran, where you took on another courageous enterprise. So for those who either read the book a long time ago or haven't read it yet but are curious, just tell us just in a couple of minutes about that enterprise that you did, where not only you were risking a lot, but these young women students who were so desperate to learn fiction, which could shape reality.
Yes.
What risk were they under coming to your apartment secretly?
Well, first of all, I want you to not get the wrong impression. What I did was nothing compared to some of these women in Iran. There are women in Iran right now as we speak who are in jail for 16 years because they didn't wear their veil. And they refuse still. I mean, the government had to retreat because millions of women would come into the streets without their veils. You can destroy a political organization or take the leaders and they will be dissolved. But what are you going to do with millions of young people who come into the streets the way you don't want them to? And you put them in jail, they come back and do it again, you know.
You know, it's such an inspiring story because I think we all feel it, right? There are risks here, and to hear that in your country, and so you've lived in multiple places now where there are great risks to our sense of security, and yet with enough numbers,
yes,
you might be able to stave off something worse. Let me ask you, though, I have to come back to your father for a second because I was really moved by a lot of what you said.
And you reminded me about Father's Day.
Father's Day is tomorrow, and you wrote in your book, I love the title of this book, Things I've Been Silent About. You know you've got to read that. Why were you silent about those things? But here's something you said about your father. My father had a weakness. Oh, and by the way, your father, which I hope you'll tell people the story of how he became the youngest mayor in the history of Tehran. My father had a weakness for goodness in the same way that my mother was fixated on correctness. And here's the key. When my brother was young, father wrote a story for him and called it The Man Who Wanted to Be Good. It was the story of my father's own life, of how he had always been obsessed with injustice and had tried to be a good man. All his life, our father kept reminding us of our duty to be good, a term he assumed to be self-explanatory, though it was, of course, impossible to define. But you've been struggling your whole life to define goodness. Tell us about your father, that impact, and what is goodness? What does it mean to be good?
Well, there's a proverb in Persian where it talks that you do something good and you throw it away to the river and God will repay you in the desert. And he would tell me that whenever you do something for someone, you shouldn't remember it. He said you should forget that you have done good. You have to do it for its own sake, you know. And he was always against injustice. In this new book, Read Dangerously, there are letters to my father. And at the end of it, in the appendix, I have a letter he wrote. And he wrote an open letter while he was in jail to Lyndon Johnson, when Lyndon Johnson announced his Great Society. And my father went to American University for his master's degree, so he had been in the US for a long time. And he was mesmerized by US. And I mentioned in the book about how he saw the main contradiction at the heart of US. He was telling me about all the prosperity, the freedoms that people have, and then you go 2 blocks away and you see people drunk and full of poverty. And the thing that bothered him most was racism. He at that time, he kept talking about it. And in the letter to Johnson, he brings it up again, you know. So goodness was a way of living where you give without expecting to take.
So now give us a couple of examples, because you are a teacher at heart. Give us a couple of examples of the authors you used in Read Dangerously that have given you sustenance, that have given you motivation to continue being good against all odds, that the good might produce something.
Well, I'm very promiscuous when it comes to books. I love them all, you know. And so my current love is James Baldwin. I ended The Republic of Imagination. My epilogue was with Baldwin. And I go back to him and I end this book with Baldwin as well, you know. He's amazing. We have many activists, and they are all great. We know about, you know most probably more than I do about the civil rights movement and everything. With Baldwin, he was not political. He was not political. He didn't look at the issue of racism from a political point of view, but from his heart's point of view. The heart is at the center of all his both fiction and non-fiction writing, you know. And to begin with, he felt the role of art is to take away from us our complacency. One thing I came back to America that I noticed when I came back was how many people wanted to be complacent. They chose to be complacent. How many times do you hear people saying, I'm not comfortable with this? Well, bloody hell, I mean, life is not comfortable, is it? You know? And well, you shouldn't be comfortable with this. And Baldwin says, artists are here to disturb the peace. I used to tell, wherever I go and talk at a university, I tell the students, you're here to be disturbed. If you come here to be confirmed, all your presumptions come true, there's something wrong with you. You shouldn't be in a place of learning, because knowledge changes you. I mean, knowledge is, and it is always about not just questioning the world. It's so easy to question the world. For me, it is much easier to question Trump than it is to question someone whom I empathize with, you know, a politician whose work, or Obama, for example. I expect more from Obama than I do from Trump.
So give me an example, though, of an author now, or a passage, it can be Baldwin or anybody, who disturbs you, who helps you become disturbed, and yet not drained, but feeling empowered to do good.
Well, I talk about, one chapter of my book is about Atwood and Handmaid's Tale. Now, I was talking to my friends, and my own first reaction to reading Atwood was that I don't want to read this. It reminds me too much, it's too real. It's a dystopian novel, but she has somehow managed to take the texture of totalitarianism. And my friends in Iran, Atwood has been translated into Persian, and she's very popular. Her books, her Handmaid's Tale has gone under over 11 printings. Before it, of course, would be banned. The regime waits for a book to become popular, then they ban it. But my friend in Iran told me, I'm not going to read this book anymore because I'm living it. I don't want to live it twice. So it was that disturbing. And it reminded me of one of the worst things that a totalitarian society can do to you. It can turn you into hatred. They work on hatred and they make you become like them. How many of you have felt that while watching the news these days? you know, some of these people come, I mean, these politicians, I'm not going to turn this into a political thing, but I just want to jump and kill myself, or preferably kill them, you know. And I think, oh my God, I'm becoming like them, you know. And I don't want to become like them. And
okay, so now I'm going to channel Azar Nafisi to help you. Okay, because I remember you cited a passage of James Baldwin when we spoke a couple of years ago, and it had to do with an essay that he wrote when he was
Yes.
in a restaurant and not being served, and then going to another and not being served. And this gets to exactly the point you're making now. Tell us that story.
Yeah, he goes with a friend to a restaurant in New York, and the waitress comes and tells him, sorry, we do not serve blacks. So they go to another restaurant, and the waitress comes and tells the same thing. And he gets so angry that he takes the glass of water and throws it at her, and then they run out of the restaurant before they are taken. And he says, what frightened me most was hatred sitting on my lap. He said that those people who want to avoid pain, they hate. They replace hatred with pain. And that is what worries me about America today, how hard we try to avoid pain. You know, while pain is so much part of life. And without pain, there can be no comfort. Without grief, there can be no joy. And if we cannot tolerate a novel like Handmaid's Tale, or a novel like Morrison's Beloved, or Huckleberry Finn, all the novels that give us reality to a point where we can't take it. You know, Mark Twain says, don't say the old lady screamed. Bring her on stage and let her scream. You know, so Nabokov in Lolita, rape of a 12-year-old girl. Mark Twain with the issue of slavery. Beloved, again, with the same issue, or Her Blue Eyes. All of these make us face the reality of the world we live in, and we don't like it. But we can ban these authors. Can you ban reality from your life? Can you just ban Putin? Say he goes away forever? No. So you face him and you use your arsenal against him, something you have, which is the truth, which they don't have.
And you know, I have been thinking about your closing line, and I understand, by the way, how many people were here for Azar's closing line, address the other night? I understand you ad-libbed that address.
Yeah, I made it up as I was sitting there listening.
But you had a prepared speech. Why did you just make it up?
Well, because, you know, I had thought about this before I came to Nantucket, so my notes were about, you know, pre-Nantucket. And then I came here, and the atmosphere, and seeing you, Michael, and Theron, whom I have forgotten, well, never mind. Theron and Maddie and Mary and all the people here, and then the two people who spoke before me. And I thought I want to react to them rather than make a prepared speech. So I sat there, and in my mind, I went through changing.
It was an impassioned speech, and the close is still resonating with me, where you talked about it's been years and years since I read Huckleberry Finn. I don't know about you, but that idea of from Huckleberry Finn, what would you be willing to do for good, for justice, knowing that you would go to hell to do it?
Yeah.
And that was such a powerful question. It resonates with me. Listen, I think the next 15 minutes, let's take some questions, and maybe we can get some, in the words of your favorite author, get some pain off our laps.
Yes.
And do some good. Any questions in the audience right now? Yes.
So I was struck.
And you know what, excuse me, I'm going to take the mic now and leave here, and so that I can get everybody's audio.
So I was so struck by your book, which I just finished yesterday,
Thank you.
that I copied out pages 137 to 140, where you talked about how easy and subtle it is for society to slip into totalitarianism. And I wondered if you could just speak to that, because I think that was probably the most important thing I read in your book, which is full of important things, but based on what is happening in the world and certainly in our country right now.
Thank you and on behalf of my book, I thank you. They go out into the world like your children. You have no control over them, but they bring amazing strangers into your home, you know. That is the best part of it. And talking about totalitarianism, one thing that, as I was writing this book, really scared me was not just the totalitarian figures, like in this country, because if there weren't all these nice, decent people who were supporting him, who were believing him, these totalitarians won't exist. And that is what happened in Iran. The bigger the lie, the more acceptable the masses were. Like before Khomeini came to Iran, they said that they saw his picture in the moon, that God had put him in the moon so that the whole Iranian community would believe in him. And over here, people so easily believe in the lies. And what I worry about are these good, decent people who go behind a totalitarian system. You know, a totalitarian system, all the bad things we say about it, there's one thing that is very attractive in totalitarian ideologies. That is, you abdicate personal responsibility. Now, in a free country, the difficulty, freedom is an ordeal. You need to fight for it every single day, you know. And you take responsibility for it. We're all responsible for what is happening, you know. While you give in to totalitarian society, it's polarized. One side has the good, the other side is bad. One side is wearing white hat, the other side is wearing the black hat. And you're always on the side of the good. So the other side, whatever they get, they deserve. You dehumanize the others to such an extent that they become enemy of the people. You know, they become a thing, you know. And so in Huckleberry Finn, there's an amazing scene where, do you know Aunt Sally in Huckleberry Finn? Where she goes, Huck is going to her farm, and he's lying to her. He said that I had an accident. There was an accident on the road or something like that. And Aunt Sally says, oh, I'm so sorry. And she's a very nice lady. She's a very sweet lady. She says, oh, I'm so sorry. Was anyone hurt? And he says, no, only an N-word. And Aunt Sally says, oh, thank God, no one was hurt. Twain puts that scene over there to tell us all good, God-fearing citizens who are so nice to one another and who go to church every Sunday. Look at them. When a slave dies, it's nobody died. Well, thank God. They see you as nobodies, you know. And that is how totalitarianism takes over. That is why progressive groups should not become like them. That is why we cannot cancel. Because we have the democratic logic. I mean, if you believe in democracy, you believe that you're confident enough not to cancel others. You confront them. You criticize them. You don't cancel them. In World War II, fascists, worst people in the world, you know, what did the Allies do? Did they put them against the wall and execute them? Did they send them to concentration camps? No. Fascists were tried. We brought them into our domain and they lost. They were punished, but they weren't punished without a fair trial. And that is what we want. It's not that we agree with these people, it is how we treat them that matters. I'm so sorry I talked so much.
No, not at all, not at all. Yes. Hold on 1 second, let me just bring this over.
It's been over 40 years since the Iranian Revolution. What is it like there today? I read the American papers. I don't know what the truth is. Are women able to express themselves? Are there differences of opinions allowed? Or is it a complete shutdown of life for everybody?
I would love to give the microphone to my friend Ladan, who is a great human rights advocate. Could you, Ladan, tell us about what's going on in Iran today?
There are two levels of realities. One is the state, which is the same, trying to control. The other is the mass of the society that is resisting. So you continue to have, as Azar said, women arrested for malveiling. They are in prison, they are flogged. But also you continue to have hundreds of thousands of women who are outside and they don't wear it. And when the police attacks them, you see other people coming to their rescue. So it's a constant battle, social battle, but the state has not changed. It's as violent and as totalitarian as it was the first day. But the society has massively changed. I can give you one example. In 1975, 75% of the population thought veil was a good thing. Today, 75% of the population thinks veil should be a free choice. That's how the Islamic Republic has changed, despite itself, the society in Iran. That's it.
You want to know about human rights? Iran is one of the places to go to. How they resisted non-violently.
Which reminds me, by the way, about Tim Snyder, who wrote On Tyranny, a Yale history professor.
Yeah.
One of his 20 lessons from the 20th century, do not obey in advance, which is very relevant to what you're all talking about. Yes?
All right, thank you so much, Azar. So I have a question about sort of the thresholds of totalitarianism, and if there was a political moment that led you to choose to finally leave Iran after 18 years of living in the Islamic Republic, and is there such a threshold in the United States where there could be enough totalitarianism where you've got critical mass and it becomes unsustainable? What does that benchmark look like for you?
A critical mass in Iran and in the United States. I think that totalitarianism creeps up on you. That Atwood has it really beautifully in Handmaid's Tale. Something is changed here, something is changed there. Atwood says that they asked everybody for ID cards. And some people thought it's a good idea because they didn't like them. In Iran, we brought in totalitarianism. I remember when they very cruelly murdered and executed the officials of the previous government. And they published their photographs in the papers. Most of the political groups supported this. When I saw the mutilated body of these people, some of whom I did like and disagreed with in real life, I felt so sad and so horrified, because that is how it starts. They do it to others and you say it's okay. Then one by one, they annihilated organizations and groups and people. And when we were demonstrating against the veil, mandatory veil, there were leftist groups even who were saying that this is not our fight, that the veil, women's rights, this is not the time to bring in the women's rights, this is an anti-imperialist fight. My goodness, you give up rights in order to gain rights. You never do that, is what you said, never welcome. So it came by one by one until you couldn't take it. And I think in the United States, like anywhere else, the same thing will happen. You nip it in the bud, as they say.
You know, we did talk about, we've just got a couple more minutes, and I did want to go back, just swing back from 2 years ago. You had these titles under consideration. You dismissed them. I want to know why. Here are some of the alternate titles you were working on. Reading in Order to Live, which is clearly a theme of yours. You can't survive without these books. What are you going to be reading tonight, by the way?
I was going to say, if I had Louise Penny's new novel, actually, I would be reading that. I love mystery. But I have Anne Perry.
But isn't that interesting? You love mystery. It's like you need an escape.
I need an escape, but I'm fascinated by mystery. You know, there is, like in the best of them, the plot is very ethical and very moral. It makes you confront moral questions. And it is not just about a death of someone. That plot moves alongside of this ethical one, in good ones, as always, not in every one.
Here was another alternate title you were working on, letter, Dear Jimmy Baldwin. You were going to write this book as a series of letters to the authors who you were profiling, and instead you switched and you wrote them as a series of letters to your father. Why the change?
Well, you know, at first I was thinking about, at first actually I was writing, I was going nuts. And when I go nuts, I write. And I was thinking, I was writing random letters from Trump to Benjamin Franklin to my father, you know, and that couldn't make a book. It was nice to just do it. So I decided I'll write to the authors that I'm talking about. But that became very artificial. I wrote them, actually, because I didn't know these writers. So I couldn't personally communicate with them. And it is so boring to tell an author what their book is all about, you know.
So final question, since you wound up with your father, do you remember the first letter that your father ever wrote to you?
Oh, yes. I was 4 years old. And he had a diary made for me. And the first letter he wrote, I couldn't read. He wrote to me about my birth, what impact it had on him, about his own life, about his future aspirations, hoping that one day I would read him. That mode, I mean, my father and I started that early corresponding. Until his death, we corresponded. We wrote, even when we were living in the same house, sometimes we wrote one another.
Well, you read him and you channeled him, and his spirit is here right now. And Azar Nafisi, it's so wonderful to talk to you again.
Happy Father's Day. Thank you so much. Thank you.